If you wear watches, you probably have a range of sizes you prefer. Maybe it's around 36, or maybe it's around 40 millimeters. When a watch falls outside that range though, you usually just skip considering it. But what if I told you that number hardly matters at all? Let me show you an example. On screen, I've listed the stats of two watches. If you had to pick which watch wears bigger, I'd be willing to bet you chose watch A. How could you not? It's bigger in just about every measurement. Larger diameter, longer lug-to-lug, and a thicker case. Your choice would be wrong though, because most people who have worn both would tell you that watch B actually wears larger on the wrist. And in this video, I'm going to explain exactly how this discrepancy can happen, why watch size specs are misleading, and what you should be paying attention to instead if you want to know exactly how a watch will wear on your wrist. Traditionally, the specifications that are used most commonly to describe a watch's size and wearing dimensions are listed on the manufacturer's website. Case diameter and thickness, lug width, and if you're lucky, lug-to-lug length and weight. I'm sure you can understand why these are the most commonly used stats. The case diameter is meant to indicate the overall size of the watch's dial and a majority of the case, along with the thickness, which estimates the sort of heft and unwieldiness on your wrist. The prevailing thought these days is that the lug-to-lug measurement is a better gauge on how a watch will wear on the wrist, and watch companies are including this increasingly on the spec lists. The lug width is usually mentioned for the anticipation of aftermarket straps, and I feel the weight is included for extra stat padding, or for the extra thin or light watches, such as titanium cases. For many, especially those who are relatively new to the hobby, these encompass all the information needed in the sizing department to make the decision on their next purchase. If the watch case is of average design and with standard aesthetics, these specs tend to be fairly accurate. Let me pose this question though. If case diameter is so important, why do you so often hear enthusiasts and reviewers say phrases like, it's a 38mm but really wears like a 40mm, or it wears smaller than its given size? If the conventional wisdom when it came to sizing was correct, why would you ever hear caveats like this? I truly and honestly believe that if you give credence to these measurements, you should consider forgetting just about everything you know about watch sizing. You hear so much already that case diameter is an outdated metric and that lug-to-lug is more important, and I think we should go even further and take every single listed dimension we see with a grain of salt. This isn't to say that these numbers are useless, but in the same way that you make a diagnosis based on a plethora of data points and bits of information, almost every aspect and minutia of a watch can impact the sizing and wearing experience on your wrist. Watch sizing is, and always has been, a game of vibes more than anything. The watch community as a whole has become obsessed with sizing specs in recent years, with many channels on this platform really just amounting to reviews, consisting of stat dumps without much actual opinion or nuance. And I know I'm saying this all while having just uploaded a video about smaller watches that listed a ton of diameter dimensions. None of us are truly exempt from this, but I feel the more knowledgeable you are in the watch collecting sphere, the more you use vibes and context to understand how a watch will wear. If you're newer to the enthusiast space, you have no experience to go off of. The constant usage of spec lists is entirely unhelpful for someone who is just starting out in the hobby. If you're researching for your first watch or two, 48mm lug-to-lug is completely meaningless to you if you don't have any context. It's a discussion surrounding numbers that mean almost nothing to either those who don't need the information or to those who don't have a way to make use of it. I can tear down the status quo as much as I want, and that too means nothing if I don't provide a better alternative. What I ultimately suggest is for you to look at a watch in 4 separate categories of the design, and assess each aspect's impact on the sizing of the watch in an additive or subtractive way. I propose that the 4 main categories of a watch's design that impact the sizing are the dial, case geometry, lugs, and the bracelet or strap. I also have a secret 5th category after these initial 4, but I'll wait to explain that when I get to it. I'll start this categorical discussion with seemingly everyone's favorite aspect of the watch, the dial. The dial isn't of itself a component of a watch you may initially think impacts the wearing size. After all, the case dimensions are the real constraint on the size of the watch. The dial is contained within this constraint. As I alluded to earlier, the sizing of a watch isn't all about the physical dimensions of it though. First, the actual size of the dial in relation to the case has a big impact on perceived size. Generally, the larger the ratio of the dial to the case size, the larger the watch will appear. In other words, if your watch has essentially no bezel and is all dial, it'll look significantly larger than the same watch but with a large bezel and smaller circular dial or face. This can be explained visually rather easily with two watches on both extremes. On one side, we have the Junghans Max Bill, a watch with an extremely minimal bezel that can't be described as anything but all dial. On the other is something like the Seiko SKX013, a dive watch with a relatively wide bezel. Both of these watches are 38mm in diameter, but if you just look at the comparison between the dials, the Max Bill is going to appear significantly wider, or dinner plate-like on your wrist. And this is only exacerbated by my next point in the discussion of dials, the color of the dial. It's widely accepted that a watch that has a lighter dial will wear slightly larger than those with darker dials of the same size. Perhaps it has something to do with the classic black is slimming rule in clothing, and there's a neurological response happening that is above my pay grade to explain. Or maybe it has to do with a bright white dial being more attention catching. All I do know is that if you compare two watches, say the classic Moonwatch and the white version, almost everyone will agree the white wears bigger. In the same vein as color, dial texture or reflectiveness can also have a minor impact. All of these aspects of perceived size can come down to how attention-grabbing a watch looks. If a dial is shinier, more pronounced, and reflects light in a way that is almost distracting to someone who sees it, it'll give a slight aura of being larger. Imagine it like a diamond on a ring that you can't help but notice. Objectively, diamonds are typically quite tiny on rings, but subconsciously, you're associating it with a larger size because your attention was drawn to it. If there was one category that has the most impact on the wearing size of a watch, it would be the case and geometry of the design. This should be fairly obvious though, as the case is already the de facto standard in measurement, and its design determines the overall silhouette and shape of the watch. But what exactly do I mean by geometry of the design exactly? Every watch has a unique shape to its case and dimensions. Most cases are not perfectly cylindrical like a tuna can. They have bezels, curved faces, and facets that add intrigue and flow to the design. And these details all contribute significantly to the size of the watch. Think back to the intro of this video, where I mentioned watch A and B, where on paper, watch B should absolutely be smaller than watch A. This example serves as a perfect representation of the impacts on case design. The enthusiast among you may have already recognized the two watches based on the dimensions alone, but I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. Mystery Watch A is the Omega Speedmaster Professional, and Watch B is the Glashütte Original PanoMaticLunar. What makes these watches such a perfect example is that the design philosophy of both is so different that the Speedmaster actually wears smaller despite its listed measurements. Many of you may already know that the 42mm is a bit of a fishy measurement to begin with due to the 2mm pusher side crown guards. But even so, that only brings it down to 40mm, which is the same diameter as the PanoMaticLunar. Once you move to the case sides, you start to see more of the story though. The PanoMaticLunar has a relatively simple design, with a nearly cylindrically shaped case with beveling on the top up to the crystal, and on the bottom to the underside sapphire. If you look at the Speedmaster's case side without the crown guards on the other hand, you'll see a significantly more complex design. The lower portion of the watch is recessed back behind the walls, which removes a lot of the material that would be near the wrist. The wall is similar to the PanoMaticLunar, but the upper edge has a significantly more pronounced bevel and taper that is lower on the watch. After this bevel, the watch's diameter gets even smaller, only widening slightly for the bezel ring. These complexities in the Speedmaster's design break up the feeling of thickness and chunkiness of the watch, both because of the removal of material, but also from a sort of play of the eye. There's a reason that watches such as Tudor's are universally accepted to wear even thicker than their listed size, and that's the slabbed-walled case design. The flatter and less complex a case's sidewall design is, the thicker and larger it will feel. In combination with all of this, if you ignore the crystal for a moment on the Speedmaster, the thickness of just the case is actually quite a bit thinner than the PanoMaticLunar. The domed sapphire is what brings the Speedmaster's thickness up so much higher. Perceived thickness of a watch case and sapphire are not the same though. The domed nature of the crystal already lowers its perceived thickness, but the most significant factor is that the sapphire is translucent when viewing it from the side. This allows light to flow through it, which sort of removes it from the thickness equation in your brain when seeing it from this angle, especially because it's recessed significantly from the bezel and the outer case silhouette too. This is mainly because the dial of the Speedmaster is already smaller than the PanoMaticLunar's because of the bezel, which lowers the perceived size as I mentioned in the previous section. And just as the dial did, finishing can have a minor effect on case sizing too. A watch with more polishing is going to reflect and catch the light more, signaling more attention and in turn making it flashier and in general more pronounced. This is the case even more so for precious metals, particularly gold, which stands out way more than just about anything else. The weight of a watch is going to make the watch wear bigger on your wrist and make you more aware of its presence throughout the day. Gold ticks this box as well, being nearly the highest density metal you can get a watch in, right behind platinum. On the flip side, titanium is usually going to lower the felt weight of the watch on your wrist and will often be a bit duller than stainless steel as well. This is not always the case though, as there are a ton of different titanium and stainless steel alloys in the watch market. If you've been enjoying this video or have found this information useful and want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing. My current goal is to reach 100 subscribers and work towards becoming partnered. I upload new videos every week discussing various topics in watches and watch collecting, with a discussion of a mystery watch related to the topic near the end of every video called the Obscure Reference. Thank you. The lugs are the next of the four main categories of watch sizing. Although they may seem less significant to the other elements of a watch because of their comparatively smaller size, the lugs share an importance similar to the case design. The lugs serve as the top and bottom silhouette and watch length spanning across your wrist. Watches with relatively large cases and shorter lugs can oftentimes wear significantly smaller than anticipated, and the same goes for the reverse, where longer lugs can make a smaller watch wear larger. Infamously, Nomos is bad about this, where most of their designs have comically large lug lengths, to the point where many of their watches wear around 3mm larger than their listed lengths. Rolex and Tudor to a lesser extent experience this as well, which works in their favor slightly when it comes to their smaller models for wearability in the general population. There are more to lugs than length though, as just like the case, the geometry of the lugs is important too. Flat, straight lugs are going to extend a watch further across your wrist and feel as though it's larger than it may actually be. In comparison, even relatively long lugs can be dampened by the usage of curved and twisted lug designs. Famously, the Omega Lyre lugs are an example of lugs that curve down to the wrist and shrink their watch's felt size. Included in this are lugs integrated into the case, or the more classic style that juts out from the case as if they were connected after the fact. Watches that have a flow to the lugs and incorporate them into the case have an easier time in lowering the perceived size on the wrist and the actual length of lugs needed. This is yet another difference between the PanoMaticLunar, which has a more classic style lugs, and the Speedmaster, that has a more case-integrated lyre lug style. Integrated bracelets are essentially an extreme of this as well, with the lugs and bracelet more or less being an extension of the case. Finally, the least known aspect of lugs that affects the wearing experience is the lug placement. Two watches with similar lug styles, lengths, and case sizes can both wear extremely differently depending on how high or low the lugs are placed on the case. Ideally, the lugs are low enough on the case such that they can hug the curvature of the wrist. Lugs too low will look somewhat strange if the watch is thick and will dig into the wrists, whereas lugs too high will make the watch wear as if it's floating on your wrist, and will increase the visual span of the lugs across it. I discussed this briefly in my previous video through the comparison of the new and old Zenith Primero case designs. Both watches have the same case diameter, shapes, and chopped lug designs. The newer Chronomaster originals, though, have the lugs placed higher on the case, which gives the watch a bizarre wearing feeling on smaller wrists. The old Primero lugs are lower down on the case as you would expect, and as a result, I feel that they conform to the wrist quite nicely. And finally, we have the bracelet and clasp. This is certainly the most overlooked aspect of watch sizing in my opinion. I actually have a video discussing the bracelet and its sizing in significantly more detail on my channel, so I will keep this section relatively brief. Needless to say, the bracelet on a watch will absolutely affect the sizing. A wider and bulkier bracelet is going to feel significantly bigger on the wrist than a sleeker one with a good amount of taper. Relating back to the lugs, a wider lug spacing is going to make a watch wear larger than a similarly sized watch with smaller lug spacing. Just think about it. There's more watch on your wrist as a whole with a wider lug spacing. Integrated bracelets are oftentimes quoted as wearing larger than their listed size, and that's typically for two reasons. First, integrated bracelets will oftentimes use male end links, which will extend the length of the watch and make it wear larger, similar to how longer lugs do the same. Second, integrated designs usually necessitate a lack of articulation in the first few links of the bracelet, resulting in the bracelet extending out even further and not curving to the wrist. In a bracelet, the more articulation and ability to conform to the wrist, the lower profile it's going to feel. The difference between a strap and bracelet matters too, for similar reasons to what I've mentioned already. A strap is going to make a watch wear smaller than the bracelet, because of the increased conformity to the wrist, thinness, and a lack of flashiness and reflectivity that the bracelet would typically have. Mentally, a strap makes the watch feel smaller, sometimes even by a millimeter or two, because there is significantly less metal extending out of the watch and around your wrist. Earlier, I mentioned that I had a secret 5th category in watch sizing. This one is separate from the other 4 in that it has nothing to do with the watch design itself. I'm dubbing this category external factors, and I believe there are a non-trivial amount of aspects that changes a watch's sizing that are out of the manufacturer's control. I'll start by saying that everyone is different, and a watch that works for one person might not for another for no objective reason. I feel that with current trends, women are typically able to pull off watches that are a little too big for them more so than a man can. When you see watch creators like Britt Pierce wearing a Speedmaster, you feel as though it works on her 14cm wrist. But I feel if you had a male creator with a 14cm size wrist, you would see a lot of comments on how it was too big for him, he's overcompensating, etc. And this isn't a complaint, but merely an observation of the current watch sizing culture we have. If you want to wear a watch that most believe is too big for you, more power to you. But generally, it's going to be more acceptable for some people to wear certain sizes over others when it comes to overall opinion, for various reasons. Another aspect seldom talked about is wrist shape. You hear about wrist size all the time. I mean, I was just mentioning it. But the fact is, two people with the same circumference wrist could have completely different wrist shapes. One person may have a much flatter wrist that allows for a bigger watch to span across it, or another may have a completely different shaped ulnar bone that causes them to wear the watch in a different spot, again changing the sizing because of how it sits on the wrist. Someone who is significantly more muscular won't necessarily have a larger wrist, but the taper of the wrist to their forearm will be more pronounced, allowing for a watch to wear differently the higher up it's worn. Finally, I think that your skin tone can even have an impact on the perceived size of a watch. Generally, a brighter watch is going to stand out a lot more on someone with darker skin than lighter, merely because of the contrasting colors. And on the flip side, I feel that a darker watch will likely wear smaller or be less noticeable with someone who has skin on the darker side of the spectrum. I think it comes down to style and what works for each person mainly. Just as someone would wear clothes or jewelry that matches their eye or hair color, I think that certain colors of cases and dials will stand out differently on different skin tones, due to the perceived flashiness or visibility. I've been waiting for the opportunity to discuss the brand of today's obscure reference on this channel for a bit now, and I think I finally have a reason to bring them up. Ressence is a luxury microbrand that specializes in designs unlike pretty much anything else in the watch industry. Ressence creates watches that tell time in an unconventional way through unconventional methods. If you've never heard of Ressence, you may be wondering how this is much different than the PanoMaticLunar I've mentioned throughout the video, as they both have asymmetric time displays with different subdials. The typical asymmetric watch is a static display of subdials with moving hands, whereas on a Ressence, the dial is the hands. The entire dial on these rotates and moves as time progresses throughout the day. And to be clear, this is a mechanical watch, so all this is done through a highly specialized movement. No batteries or electronics are involved. The obscure reference for this video is no different either. The Ressence Type 8 is a more minimalist take on this format for the brand in both dial layout and case shape. And that's how this watch is relevant to this video, the sizing. The measurements of this watch come out to be quite strange, as it has a listed diameter of 43mm. It's difficult to estimate as this watch has practically no lugs and not even a protruding crown, but it really wears closer to perhaps 38mm. The listed thickness is 11mm too, which at its base is already quite thin. But when you take into account the fact that most of this thickness is from an extremely domed sapphire, you start to see that this watch wears even thinner than listed as well. Not only because the sapphire is slightly translucent, although the dial itself is domed, negating this slightly, but also because the significant dome means the thickness is only 11mm at the peak of the dome, and everywhere else is thinner. The watch is titanium as well, making it wear even lighter too. I understand that this watch is not going to appeal to some people who like more traditional designs. It definitely has a hyper-modern, smartwatch-esque design philosophy to it. To me though, it's almost a flex to have a watch with the aesthetics of a smartwatch, but through mechanical means. The movement and technologies going into this are astounding in my opinion. I'm aware of hundreds of different watch microbrands, but Ressence is still the one that I come back to hoping that I'll be able to afford one day. The minimalist movement and case design, case shape, and subtle sort of elegance to these is extremely appealing to me. I hope to handle one of these one day at the very least. They're just so interesting and unique in an industry full of conventional designs. Despite my strong stance against the common usage of diameter and lug-to-lug measurements in this video, I, like everyone else, will continue to use them regardless. It is the de facto standard and the lens through which most collectors understand a watch's size currently. If you're watching any of my future or previous videos though, and see my mentioning of sizing on a watch, always know that it comes with the caveat that every watch wears differently and that a dimension is really only a feeling. I believe that you need to take every aspect of a watch into consideration when discussing sizing, and I suggest you start doing the same. This is why I always advocate for trying a watch on before buying it if possible, because that's going to be the single best way to determine how it fits on you. I understand that's not possible for many niche, discontinued models, or micro brands. Seeing videos of someone wearing it with a wrist size similar to yours is typically the next best option, but even that fails as wrists aren't all shaped the same. Try to find videos or images of the watch from as many angles as possible, or better yet, hopefully you can find content of it next to a watch you are familiar with to give context to its size. At the very least, I hope that I've helped with this discussion of watch sizing and measurements and opened your eyes a bit to how misleading it can be and what aspects to consider when looking into if a watch will fit you. How do you feel about watch dimensions and sizing? Do you have any hot takes regarding different watches or conventional knowledge when it comes to measurements? I'm curious to see the discussions about it in the comments. Let me know about any brands, watches, or topics you'd like for me to cover in future videos. Thank you for taking the time to watch.